Hey there, welcome everybody to the ISCPO 360 Security video podcast. We're upgrading from our previous events. We've got the ISCPO, a couple of the members here with me today to talk about where it all began and how it all started. To my left, I've got Glenn and Rod with me, and we want to kind of sit down and chat and cover some the genesis of things and really where it all began, what happened in the last 9 years, and where we're going to the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Byron. So Glenn Master, president again of the ISCPO, and we'll get to that in a minute. I'm almost reluctant to take on this role, but very excited. So where do you want to go with this? The genesis?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about a little bit about each other first, how we got into this maybe. I mean, how it all started and where we played our roles.
Where did we first meet, and when did we first meet?
We first met at Alliance out in North Fort Worth, and you were at Motorola. I was the manager of corporate security for XL Logistics.
And I was 28 years old.
And you were a baby.
Very young.
You were a baby in the industry, and the rest of us were carrying you. And but that's where we first met, and we did a lot of work out there with Ross Bro Jr. and his group out there at Alliance, and then the other things we were doing on a national scale with each of our companies, and that's really where we started, from the get-go.
It's interesting. So I got into the loss prevention security industry very young, obviously, at 28. Supply chain logistics, not knowing anything about supply chain logistics. And as I further learned, as we knew, a lot of companies would hire retired law enforcement officers. Yep. They would bring them in with the title of security manager. And I guess through just dumb luck or by chance, ultimately got on with Office Depot. That's where we first met, back when e-commerce was blowing up. And It was B2B. There was no B2C yet. So nobody obviously understood where e-commerce was going to end up going. And I think it was kind of strange, because even at Office Depot, the first loss prevention group there was not made up of true loss prevention professionals. We had a few guys from internal audit, a few young guys like myself, and Wes Bank, who's now on our board of directors as well. He came from Jewel Osco Grocery. Mm-hmm. I only had 2 years in the industry. But when we talk about the genesis of the ISCPO, it really started there because, Office Depot, like most retailers, they were going to large conferences such as RELA and RF. There would be a huge emphasis on retail loss prevention with little, if any, emphasis on supply chain logistics. So we almost felt as outsiders there at a loss prevention conference. And I think I came to you as like, you're number two, and I had an idea of all places in the shower.
No. You're not thinking about me in the shower. I'm not going to let you get away with that, neither is your wife.
I have my best ideas either in the shower or on my back porch drinking coffee in the morning. Okay. This just happened to be in the shower.
You changed your story. You had coffee. I mean, you're thinking about me.
All right. We'll shift gears. I was having coffee and thinking.
Thank you.
And thinking about a networking platform for supply chain loss prevention professionals. Because when you think about it, and you think about how large the global supply chain is, right? Regardless whatever vertical you're in industry, pharmaceutical, technology, retail, manufacturing, the common denominator is the supply chain. And to think about a trade organization that potentially could almost be allowed as a networking platform, that's kind of where the genesis was. And that's when I called you. I think then we were doing business. You were doing business from a contract standpoint for the company I was with. We were at Indianapolis at an Olive Garden. Sure. We started, and my first question to him was, "Hey, how much work are you currently? How busy are you right now?" And I've got an idea. And the first thing out of your mouth was, "How much work is now this going to cost me?" Right?
True statement.
And after a bottle of wine, some chicken parmesan, and a napkin, we sort of wrote this out, what this trade organization would look like. And I mean, we had absolutely no idea. How do you start a trade organization? And I think a little bit later after that conversation, we consulted with some industry veterans, Frank Johns, Gene Smith, Loss Prevention Magazine. They had already formed the Loss Prevention Foundation, which really was taking the whole educational piece, creating industry standard around retail loss prevention, and they created 501c. So we had no idea, right?
No, but if you remember, one of the things in those days is that when the supply chain would have a problem, particularly in retail, the typical standard answer was this: wait and watch until there was a major loss. And when there's a major loss, they'd send a store retail guy over to a warehouse, to a distribution center, and they'd say, figure it out. They'd catch a crook or two, and they'd say, okay, we're done, and they'd walk away and go home, right? And then we came along, and I know for myself, at Excel and also at Sears, it was, we need you to come in and figure this supply chain security thing out for us. And oh, by the way, you're a test case. Well, the danger there is, as a test case, you could be gone any day.
Right.
And so you had to sort of come in with a magic wand and say, what do we do? How do we do? And that was just that many years ago. Today, we've evolved to the point past COVID where, within COVID, supply chain became a household name. And people began to understand there's a lot more pieces to the puzzle than just the bad guy, And we all know that the things we did before, like, covert cameras, for instance. I mean, it was a mess to try to put one of those in. Today, they're itty bitty, and we can put them anywhere in a matter of seconds, right? Yeah. So we've come a long ways in the industry, but the supply chain security piece is still growing, I think, and still evolving, and we've been on the front edge of that. I mean, you think about the number of buildings that the three of us and the number of employees that we've dealt with over the last many years. It's a staggering number.
Yeah, and I think the model that both you guys have talked about retail, when there's an issue, call the retail guy to come over to the warehouse to see what's going on. Sad to say that that's still the model of many retailers today, and the industries as well. I mean, and that's where we need to get to a stance where there's a place for the professionals in supply chain can go. We both all talked about the conferences, how there might have been maybe one, maybe two sessions around supply chain, but it was really about workplace safety and maybe employee theft. Nothing about this last mile delivery that's happening today, right?
Right,
So,
or you might have back in the days when we had the Cargo Cats
Yep.
and a couple of those groups, they were almost always on the agenda because they had great stories to tell of, trailers being stolen,
Right.
or if you'll remember your situation where you had over here in Arlington of, the bad guys cutting through the roof and then lowering down the ropes into a warehouse to stage how much product that they were going to steal, and then they'd steal the truck and away they'd go. Well, Wild West days, right? That was only a few years ago.
Yeah.
And look at where we're at today.
So I want to know one thing, because we're now coming up on a decade. How did he get involved in this? Because we were talking about that at lunch, and I honestly do not remember how you got involved in this organization.
I can tell you how he got involved. You and I met in Indianapolis on that nice rainy night, which we hadn't seen rain in months here in Dallas, and we figured out initially what we wanted to do. We ruled out things we were not going to be involved in, and we said we need someone else to assist us. We need someone else who can be part of this movement from the very beginning. And we knew that we wanted somebody also here in Dallas, mainly so that in that first year, 2, 3 years, whatever, we had the ability for all of us to meet on a face-to-face basis, on a fairly regular basis, to work through things. That turned out to be a really smart move. And then, of course, Byron paid me $50 every part. No, he didn't pay me anything. But we brought, Byron was the one person that was on both our lists from the very beginning, and made perfect sense given his background, given what we knew about him professionally, knew his expertise, his attention to detail. And we're like, yeah, Byron's the guy. And then we had a conversation with him, NRF.
NRF.
Yeah.
Yep.
And from there, somehow or another, we convinced him, and here we are.
I didn't get to see the napkin, but I've heard stories about the napkin.
Okay.
Where is the napkin?
The napkin's my fault. I got rid of it because I'm an idiot, okay? I didn't keep the napkin. I should have kept it. My bad.
So what's crazy about this, and if you look at this from the genesis to the evolution, right? As I mentioned before, e-commerce B2B. There was no B2C, and all of a sudden, then the advent of the cell phone, 2007, 2008, the average consumer worldwide being able to order whatever they wanted, and it was interesting how so many retailers were looking at some of the big boys, the transportation companies, utilizing them for their direct delivery, having to work with their loss prevention or security groups, but yet. As we know, transportation from point A to point B, that is the most expensive. So they started diversifying. You started getting these hybrid solutions, which I kind of, cut my teeth in at the logistics level, the Pitney Bowes level, as these developed, where they started contracting this out, regional carrier, final mile delivery. And it was amazing how many times I would go to a final mile carrier's distribution center, do an audit, do an investigation, and I would see 10 other companies, and I knew their loss prevention peers, and all of a sudden now, the light bulb went off that, hey, if I'm seeing this and they're experiencing this with my product, I know these other companies and my peers are experiencing the same thing. And then as we started as the ISCPO, then we became a trade organization, which of course we didn't know what the heck we were doing anyway. Right. And had that first conference, and everybody started talking about the same things. That first conference, I think we had maybe 5 vendors and maybe 50 people attend. Yep.
Thank goodness we got to do it in a free location and a great location. But thank goodness it didn't cost us any money to do it because we didn't have the money to pay for it.
Yeah. And it's very interesting. After 9 years of doing this, and then having the ability to travel globally, and then talk to people in different countries, and they're facing the same challenges that we saw 8-9 years ago within the industry. And that's where I really think where we've been over the past 9 years, and of course next year being a decade, and it's going to be a huge celebration, right? And we're going to look at our achievements and our accomplishments, where exactly this organization can go, and what we're going to be doing.
And I think for us it's unique where we rely heavily on what our members can do for us and what we can do for them, but also the board. Our diverse board has helped us a great deal, and there have been folks that have come and gone off the board, and people have left their mark with the ISCPO. Sure. And we've got some new board members joining here soon. But the members have really driven our agenda. And that's happening even today as we talk about what's going to happen in 2024 for our next conference and how we're going to look at our solution providers and that support. So I think it's constantly moving.
Well, and I can tell you that, for me, I think is the most important, right? So he mentioned solution providers. All conferences that I've been to seem to be the same, right? I mean, if you look at it, they've got great speakers, they've got a great venue. But regarding the solution providers, a lot of times you'll go into a large conference hall, and there may be 200 solution providers. By the time I walk to aisle 3, my head's already spinning. Right. And sometimes you won't even see those solution providers even in business maybe the following year. Right. And I think what really differentiates the ISCPO is our preferred vendor program, right? And how we've established this and where this is going to continue, where, and we've gotten feedback from vendors. They love it. When you think about this model of we're not going to invite 500 people to our particular conference. We're going to have a select group of preferred vendors. As we continue down this journey, we're going to have a preferred vendor program that is exclusive, and it's a symbiotic relationship. It's I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and we both benefit to where the board members actually pick the solution providers working with them in their particular field. So for example, our first preferred vendor coming out of 2023 is Verkada Camera Solutions. They're out of the West Coast. I personally use them within our company. They've got a phenomenal solution, especially in a warehousing environment. And what's really unique about them that I've never dealt with any other vendor, my team actually on a month basis meets with their engineers, and they are constantly wanting feedback from us from an investigation standpoint of how can we improve their product. I've never had a vendor do that. And I love to be able to speak to them. And then when other people in the industry say, hey, do you have a camera provider solution specifically for warehouse? Absolutely. Let me introduce you to G, who's my national account guy. And I think by having that select group of preferred vendors where the board can speak specifically to them because they've worked with them before, that's what makes us unique at the ISCPO.
If you think one of the things we did from the very beginning is we said we want to have a different relationship with vendors. We want them to be our partners. And so from the very beginning at conference, if you remember, from the very first one, the thing we've said is we're going to have a smaller core group because we want them to be invested in us and we want to be invested in them as partners. But we also want them in the room. So many conferences you go to, vendors are not even allowed into where the speakers are at. They stay outside behind a different door. In our case, we said we want them in here with us. Why? Because we want them to understand these are the things we're training on because this is what's important to our industry and the people in here. And you need, as a vendor, to understand that so your product actually fits within the capacity of what we need.
Yeah, it creates that 2 levels of participation, right? So they're engaged inside the conference and talking to our members and attendees, and then other is just listening to what's being presented which they have not been given that chance.
Right.
I mean, they have to be prepared for the vendor show, which is like a football field away or more. And that's really what's helped us drive this small, unique, intimate event where we don't go above 150 at this point, attendees, and we haven't gone above 18 solution providers. It really keeps it very unique and very personal. And it's been helpful for me as well. So.
It's funny you mentioned that. Out of the last conference we had in April, which 7-Eleven graciously hosted again. I think Byron's ready to hand that off. But I'll let the cat out of the bag. It's going to be in Houston next year. So we picked another central United States, although I'm warning everybody, it's humid in Houston, a lot more humid than it is in Dallas in April. But it was unique because, to your point, the vendors are in the room, they're listening to the speakers, they're listening to what is the latest and greatest regarding incidents or regarding problems that the supply chain security professionals are facing. And after each presenter, it was amazing to just walk around the room and listen to the conversation between the vendors, between other security professionals for companies, specifically talking about the last presenter, and then start talking about their own challenges, which again, it generates ideas. So even if the vendor doesn't have a solution, the vendor's now thinking, how can I create a solution for this person and their problem?
Right. Well, I think also with that, the vendors were able to see that we are a true global organization. And they were able to see some of our speakers, for instance, our speaker from the Middle East. And as he talked about the issues of the Middle East, they're able to visualize, wait a minute here, we're not impactful there. How do we get impactful? Right. And we saw the energy afterwards where they were able to talk with him. And he's such a great, humble guy. And to be able to get that interaction and that relationship, moving, if you will. And, and then we talked about human trafficking in the supply chain, right? We talked about crime. We talked about so many different things that the vendors, I think, were sort of blown away that, wait a minute, these guys are very diverse in what they're doing and how they're doing it. And as a result, I think it was a great success of doing all the things we originally said we wanted to do from the time we started this thing on a napkin and a blue pen.
Well, and I think our presenters this year were gracious enough to allow us to post their content on our site. So that's available. And we've been happy in the last several years to have the bulk of the presentations, both video and the decks, available for anyone to get. So it's out there. I mean, if you don't use, the mass shooting presentation or the panel discussion around human trafficking, just as a listen to refresh yourself, I mean, that's a mess, but the content's there.
Well, I can tell you, having led the panel, numerous phone calls and emails from people who were in the room saying, I want more information. And I have to say that the folks on the panel and U.S. Customs, Homeland Security, being part of that, just did a great job of providing their time, their data. They gave us a senior person to be part of it. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm glad we've grown it to the point where we're getting people saying, yeah, I want to be involved. And that's the nice thing too. When we were the first couple of years there, we had to go drag people to get involved. Now people are saying, I want to be involved. How do I get on next year's agenda? Just like, I'm gonna steal the cat here a little bit, okay? What we're about to do in Canada. We have some great things on the agenda for this current year and for what we're doing in the future. And I think Canada, Houston, and some of the other things are really, really important to the future of the organization.
And that's the key, right? So he let the cat out of the bag, right? So October, do we have a date yet?
I thought we did.
October 23rd?
I'd have to look it up on my phone, but I'm still looking at my phone in my pocket.
So it's interesting because one of the things that we're doing different at the ISCPO, as you guys know, is our board director representation. And we've got a board director that's based in Toronto. We've got another representing the Canadian market. We've got another board director representing Latin America. We're in the midst of having a board director representing Europe. So they understand their specific regions, their challenges. They've got a very strong network, the folks that we're picking in those particular regions. And instead of, obviously, we're going to have our annual conference, and that's open to everybody globally. But when you think about it, not everybody can get on an airplane from another country and come to the conference. So the great idea, obviously, is let's bring the conference to them, but not necessarily have this major 2 or 3 day conference. Let's have a 1-day summit. And that's what we're going to do in Canada and Toronto in October. We're going to have a 1-day invite-only security and loss prevention professionals for different trucking, transportation, supply chain organizations throughout Canada. We're going to have a small group of speakers. We're going to have just an exclusive invite invite only of vendors. And again, replicate that intimate setting that we have been so successful with the conference over the past 9 years. And we're going to do that in Canada. And if it works there, obviously, we're going to replicate it in Latin America. If it works there, replicate it in Europe, right?
All right.
Well, then there's also, our partnerships. And I get excited about some of the partnerships for some of the writing and education we're doing for the current generation as well as the next generation of people in this profession. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you just wrote an article for one of those.
I did.
Okay.
It's should be
I'm
coming.
going to tee you up on that one, okay?
Loss Prevention Magazine coming out next month, and don't hold your breath. It's creating loss prevention programs from the ground floor. Because I've been fortunate, or by dumb luck, this is now the 4th company that I've done this in. So there is a blueprint. The blueprint does work. But, it's funny because I've been asked to write a lot of articles historically on the international supply chain piece, which I'm not playing in that space anymore. But when, it's funny when you get the ideas for these articles when people come to you, hey, I'm now challenged with company X to create a loss prevention program from the ground floor. I know you've done that. What's the success? How do you do it? Where do you even begin? So tired of answering these questions. Why not just write an in-depth article and have it out there for everybody?
Yeah, and it's not just about catching crooks. Don't get me wrong. I love catching a good crook, all right? I love catching a creative crook. But there's so much more to what we do than just catching crooks. And as a result, I think with the expertise we have with us, with the expertise on the rest of the board members and our members, the ability for us to lead the industry worldwide, we're teed up to be able to do it better than I think anyone else out there. And I'm going to go back just a second, because one of the things we didn't talk about earlier is that one of the things when you go back to, for instance, the LPC and LPQ qualifications that are within the industry, if you remember when that started, the organization was trying to figure out who can help us write these pieces. They had the corporate office sides, they had plenty of people, retail stores, they had plenty of people, and they got to supply chain. And they were stuck. And they called me and you and said, can y'all help write this material? And can you help write the test? And little did we know, even though we did it individually, how well that just laid on top of each other for about 60, 70% of that original processing. Yeah. And it was exciting to be able to do that for the industry. Well, we're still doing that for the industry. And hopefully we've got some folks coming up that one of these days when we both retire, and Byron, I think you're going to beat us to the punch, it looks like, from what your schedule is, then we have those folks prepared and ready, trained to take over and lead it to the next level.
So that being said, so that was the Loss Prevention Foundation, right? Was the leading edge. Talk about the partnership with the Loss Prevention Foundation right now. I mean, we've literally had that relationship almost since the beginning.
Well, they were an advisor for us.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it shook out, right? How do we do this? How do we become a 501, and what works, and how do you grow membership? I mean, really, how do you get your word out? And it was difficult. I mean, today we're still grassroots.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at social media and you look at LinkedIn, which is probably our most prolific information out there. We're still a grassroots organization.
Right.
We rely heavily on our members, and now we rely heavily on our solution providers to share with their clients to understand what the ISCPO might be able to offer them.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. So.
And I mean, speaking of the Loss Prevention Foundation, they now are expanding in Europe. Yep. So very similar to what we did 9 years ago. I mean, they have a very solid blueprint. Those were the first folks we consulted. I mean, hey, we want to get into the European Union. We want to get throughout the UK. I mean, what's the best course of action? And more importantly, do you know anybody over on that side of the pond that may be interested in maybe becoming a board director or even an advisor? Yeah. And we're very open to that, right? Rod just mentioned, I mean, you can let the cat out of the bag because we're about to make this announcement on the 3 new board directors.
Yeah, so we've got some great board directors coming on board. We've had some awesome folks that are with us and have left, and hats off to them. We've got Alex Del Carmen is going to be joining us, leading some of the education programs and training. We've got Tracy Nini, who's going to be doing our membership programs, and then Paul Getz, who's going to be helping us with the supply chain and focus around that retail environment supply chain. And we're excited about that. The announcement will be coming out in a few days after this podcast comes out, I'm sure, but we'll get some more information.
And the uniqueness is we put our board to work, right? But again, we're challenging them. Hey, what interests you? If you want to do this, obviously it's a side hustle for them, right? And it's work. It's, as we know, it's work, creating this, right? So if you want to join the board, or even if you want to be an advisor to the board, what do you really like? What space do you like? And we're actually having those individuals tell us, hey, this is what interests me. This is what helps me in my own professional life. And if it could work in my professional life, work to help out the ISCPO, this is what I'm interested in. And we're allowing them to run with that. And it flows well, right? Because as we know, if you enjoy what you're doing and it's a benefit on both sides, it's really not work. And it's going to benefit the ISCPO in a lot of different ways.
I think as we wrap up this first video podcast, any closing thoughts? I mean, as we move from
I've
this?
got one before you say anything.
All right, because
Okay?
I've talked enough.
No, and I mean this. You know, we've put a lot of work in over the years, right? And to your point, we've had some really good board members that have been there. But I got to say, working with you two clowns has been great. I've learned a lot. I've appreciated it. We've put in some sweat and tears here. We have. But I don't think the people behind the scenes have any clue the amount of work the two of you have done and continue to do for this organization. And if no one else will say it, let me be the first to say it in front of the cameras, as painful as it is. Y'all done a great job, and I'm glad to be part of what we're doing.
You know, I'll wrap up in 20 seconds here. Can I do anything in 20 seconds?
Never.
No.
I'll force myself. No, I mean, it goes back out at both of you guys. I mean, obviously, a lot of work, a lot of sweat equity, but it pays off. And every year we have these conferences, and I talk to vendors, I talk to members, I talk to folks who were there for the first time, and we keep hearing the same thing. What you guys are doing, what the ISCPO is about, it's different than anything we've experienced before. And I think collectively we just need to figure out how can we take that excitement and take it to the next level. And I think going into the next decade is our opportunity.
Yep.
You're right. Let me just kind of close about the new generation of supply chain folks out there, folks that are getting encouraged coming out of college, people like Alex talking about supply chain, you know, those other groups just really getting engaged. We need those members to join. Even if you're a student at a local college and you have some desire to get in logistics or supply chain, and security might not be it, but the other side of the pot might be it. So, I mean,
Operational.
check
sure.
us out. Yeah, I mean, check us out. There'll be a lot of information. The ISCPO website has a wealth of information and contacts. You can contact any one of us. You can also hit up info@iscpo.org for any direct information, and we can share that with you. So
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed this new version of our podcast.
It was fun. I get to do it in person with you guys via
Yeah.
Teams call, right?
Yeah. Well, Teams. COVID's a whole nother story. Maybe that's a whole nother segment for another
Absolutely.
video. So, but I appreciate it, guys.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.